with you in conversations about your reflections, help us think through how we dig deeper into this, where there perhaps some need for clarification and all of that. And so for the students in the room in particular, this is really an opportunity for you to help us to understand the subtext and the text that's part of the data. That's one of the most important part, and so we want to make sure that we build as much time into it as possible. So we'll start with the data, then we want to go into, Makeba will present some information for the larger context, and then we really want to spend the bulk of our time in discussions with you, and so we really will appreciate as much of your candid perspective on that. And so with that said, Scott, you can get us started on sort of the context of it.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all coming on this beautiful day to be indoors and sitting with us. It's a little toasty in here, but I'm sure we'll do fine. I want to introduce the Campus Climate Survey. It is an annual survey that we do. It's done every year, and we use standard questions each year. However, last year I asked Karen Frost-Jones, who I'll introduce in a minute, to alter that pattern to really explore issues around belongingness and other campus issues that are pertinent for the conversation today. As Fatah said, we will limit Karen's time to 30 minutes so that there can be ample time for discussion. With that, Karen Frost-Jones directs our institutional assessment and research unit on campus, does many surveys at the university, and is herself an expert in assessment and research. And so I think you'll find her extremely knowledgeable and would be able to answer any of the kinds of questions you might have. So with that, the floor goes to Karen and the presentation.
Thanks, Scott. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. You know, as a researcher, you always worry that no one's going to show up when you present on research. So I really appreciate you being here today. So let me just get back, just a little bit of background with Campus Climate Survey. This is an AU-developed survey. So American University has a number of surveys that we do. Some are national surveys so that we have some benchmark data, and other things are homegrown surveys. As Dr. Bass said, this is one that's specifically designed to hit at the things that we find are most important here at AU. And it was revised this last year, Dr. Bass has pointed out, especially in reflection what we've done with the RISE, or Reinventing the Student Experience. How many of you have heard about that? Okay, good. So you're going to notice that there's a lot of, and I'll try and point out to you here some themes that we hit on with that survey that are directly related to that. This survey, when it was redone, we got a lot of input from way across the institution. Especially, I'd like to thank the President's Council on Diversity and Inclusion, because they were very helpful in helping us design questions, look at our questions, and give us feedback. Today, we're really focusing on the undergraduate results. So this is a survey that was done of undergraduate and graduates, but today we're only focusing on undergrads because there's a lot of need just in that one area. And just to give you a sense, it's a fairly good response rate of 23.4%. That's pretty good for AU. And it's pretty typical, or the results are pretty representative of the student population. It might not be any surprise to you that have done studies on survey research that women are slightly more likely to respond to surveys. So we have a little bit of a bias there for women, but otherwise it's pretty representative. These are the topics that are covered for the survey, a lot of different topics. We're going to focus a lot on the AU commitments and the things that are related to the campus and social environment. We're going to focus a little bit less on things that you might be less interested in, like the Thrive indicator. But we're also probably not going to spend as much time on services and support, but hopefully at another point we'll be able to spend some more time on that. And then, of course, as the survey nerd that I am, I can't go forward without talking about a little bit about the results, wonky things like the margin of error and the confidence interval. This you probably already know if you've done research, but just to keep in mind that the more you break down survey results, the larger the margin of error and the opportunities potentially. Anyway, overall, a 2.13 margin of error is pretty good, actually. So let's dig into some of the results. The first thing I wanted to talk about are the academics. And what we focused on are the first question, I'm learning about things that interest me. Second one, I'm learning skills to prepare me for a career or advanced degree. The third one is my courses are intellectually challenging. And the fourth, our faculty are accessible. And you'll notice that what we did with this scale is it's almost always, most of the time, sometimes, rarely, or never. So it's a pretty broad scale. It's a pretty high bar you have to hit almost always or most of the time, but that's what these results are here. Fairly strong and faculty are accessible and learning about things that interest me. Other academic questions, and you're going to see a theme of communication throughout our survey, because one thing we really learned in our work with RISE is that AU does not do a very good job communicating with you. We communicate you in ways that, like, we're used to talking, and communicating in email. You're not as used to doing that in email, and we bury things in the third paragraph of our email, right? So we're trying to get at how well we're doing with communication. Faculty clearly communicate expectations, 64%. The strongest one on here in this one is I'm included in classroom discussions. That's 83%. But look at the difference between that and my professors have cared about me as a person, or my professors have made me excited about learning. And so that's a gap that I know in academic affairs we're very interested in closing. So we break out a lot of our results by race, ethnicity to try and get a better understanding of what these results look like for different populations. So for this one, I am learning how to view issues from different perspectives. You notice that for Black students, and you're going to see kind of a pattern here where international students generally relate things or rate things higher across the board almost. So on this one, I am learning to view issues from different perspectives. It's the first cluster. Faculty manage classrooms to ensure respectful treatment of all perspectives. That's the second one. That's slightly better than the viewing from different perspectives. And the last one is my courses present diverse perspectives where appropriate. And so across the board here, Black African American students are lower than each of the other categories. And I think overall there's some opportunities here for improvement.
I know we have a super small population of Native American Indian folks, but what about Asian folks as a category? Black, Hispanic, white, and
we didn't have it on here because I don't remember why we didn't put it on here, but yeah, this is what we have for right now. So, and I'll be happy to, if you have questions throughout, my suggestion is, especially if it's about a slide, just to mark there's a slide number on the bottom, or if you remember the title of the slide, we can always go back to it afterwards. And
also, should we not get to your questions and comments at the end of the session, you'll want one of these so that we fix up here and your contact information, we'll get back to you with responses.
yes.
Okay?
So we also, especially in the academic questions, you'll see in some other places, wanted to break this out by political orientation to try and get an understanding of what the experience is like for students who are from different parts of the political spectrum. And here you'll notice I'm learning about how to view issues from different perspectives. It's 49 versus 57 for liberal. Conservatives, the biggest difference is in this middle one, faculty manage classrooms to ensure respectful treatment of all perspectives. And in that case, our conservative students rate that as 54%, and liberal students rate it as 80%. And my courses represent diverse perspectives where appropriate. Again, the gap is 45 to 64%. So there are some challenges there. We also broke it out by school college. And I'm looking for Taylor. Because we were talking about this earlier and she mentioned this would be interesting to look at. So I'm learning to view issues from different perspectives. CAS does very well, as does SIS. Faculty manage classrooms to ensure respectful treatment of all perspectives. SOC is actually the strongest on that one, but CAS is also very strong. SPA is has the lowest number there, and SPA also has the lowest number for my courses represent diverse perspectives where appropriate. So another section of the survey has to do with student self-agency, your ability to be able to navigate through the university services, to be able to effectively advocate for yourself, and to have the resources and support that you need for you to be effective. And on these questions, we have a question that says, I take an active role in ensuring that you have a positive experience at AU. 72% of undergraduates say that they do that almost always or most of the time. Meeting administrative deadlines, 86%, course deadlines, 93%. Only 69% of students said that they had a long-term plan for financing each year of your education. So of course, these are things we look at in terms of that something like that also helps in terms of retention, helping you be successful to stay here. Let's break it out then by race, ethnicity. So there are other questions here on personal care. Reach out to friends for help when needed. Most students do that. That's one of your strengths. However, it doesn't really change too much by race, ethnicity. Ask resident assistants or other peer leaders for guidance when appropriate. That's the lowest. That's the least one. Reach out to staff for help when needed. International students do that apparently way more than other students. And reach out to faculty for help when needed. International students also, other ones are we're pretty close together, but international students are more likely to reach out and use those services. Okay, so let's jump into the campus and the social environment. I have at least one staff member that I can go to if I need support. Hispanic students are actually more likely to say that they have a staff member that they can go to if they need support. I have at least one faculty member that I can go to if I need support. Or everybody is more likely to have a faculty member and a staff member that they can go to if they need help or support. But you'll notice in that one that the Black African American students are least likely. And then the last one is I have at least one friend on campus that I can go to if I need support. And again, it's you're more likely to have friends that you can go to. So this is interesting for us as an institution to look at. I really love for you to have across the board someone, staff member, faculty members, and students and friends that you can go to for support. So this is a question that we really want to dig in on at some point because one thing I've noticed is feeling included on campus can have different meanings for different students, but these are pretty big differences. So the question is, I feel included on campus. Only 33% of Black African American students agree that they feel included on campus. Hispanics, it's 59%. White is 71%, and international is 56%. So those are some pretty big differences. I feel included on campus. It's hard to see this a little bit, but we also wanted to look at it by other kinds of categories. So what you'll notice is there's really no difference by gender, by sexual orientation, or by disability. But if you look at this second one, political orientation, there is a very big difference, 47% for conservative students versus 70% for liberal students. So we're going to now talk about the results, the questions on campus safety. So there's two different kinds of safety that we asked about. One is I feel emotionally safe on campus, and the other one is I feel physically safe on campus. And for this one, we also see big differences by race, ethnicity. But what about gender? So we broke it out by gender, and you'll notice that in general, men are more likely to feel emotionally safe on campus and more likely to feel physically safe on campus. Okay, so we have a few other questions that especially relate to student-to-student relationships. So the first one is, other students care about me as a person, and other students treat me respectfully. And here we see a gap where only 65% of students say that other students care about me as a person. It's fairly good on treating respectfully, it's 81%. Okay, so this one is going to require a little bit of explanation. We asked similar questions different ways. So we asked two different sets of questions. One was, to what extent do you agree that AU students are committed to, and all these things? And then the other way we asked the question is, to what extent is the university committed to each of these things? So this way, students had a chance to reflect upon the degree to which their fellow students were committed to things, and the degree to which the university itself was committed to these things. And I think it's kind of an interesting result, because when it looks at cultivating an interest in other cultures and global affairs, that's the strongest one, and it's the one where students are pretty equally agree that students and the university is committed to that. But then when we get down to the next one on creating a campus community where everyone has a sense of belonging, students are actually slightly more likely to say that the university is committed to that than students themselves. The same for encouraging respect for diverse views and perspectives. But it flips when we look at combating discrimination and bias and encouraging student wellness. I think on all of these, we're looking at the numbers in themselves. They're not probably as high as we would expect or like. Does that make sense? Because I know it's a little bit confusing. Okay, so how about creating a community where everyone has a sense of belonging? Let's take a look at this. On this, when we look at students versus the university, creating a campus where everyone has a sense of belonging, 34% for Black, 52% for Hispanic, 57% for white, and 63% for international. So across the board here, whether it be for university or for students, it follows pretty much the same pattern. Encouraging respect for diverse views and perspectives. On here too, we see that the numbers are lowest for our Black African American students, higher for Hispanic students, pretty similar for white students, and higher for international. Combating discrimination and bias. Again, this is where it flips a little bit, and the students are stronger. So students are more likely to see this, and you see that it's, you can see the pattern then by race ethnicity for that one as well. Combating discrimination and bias by class. Now, one of the things we wanted to do is on some of these, we broke them out by your incoming class to see how freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors view things differently. We wanted to see there's a lot of things that have been happening just in the last year in terms of trying to improve the student experience. So one question has, if students who are newer to the institution, are they seeing that? Is that being reflected? And so here you can see that, interestingly, first-year students likely than their peers in other classes to say that, or to agree that students or the university are committed to combating discrimination and bias. Then just a couple of other questions here that I wanted to throw in so you could see it, because we looked at a lot of different things, but you also see that our AU's commitment to providing access for individuals with disabilities and enhancing student social life are both areas where there's opportunities. And I know this is a lot of data, so we can go back to some of it after, when we're doing questions. So to what extent do you agree or disagree that AU students or the university is committed to, and this is being responsive to student concerns, taking troubling situations on campus seriously, taking actions to address troubling situations, and keeping me in the loop about important issues. And it should be pointed out that this was done, this survey was completed before the incident in May of last year. So again, here this is where you see some pretty big differences by race, ethnicity, in terms of students' views on these, in this area. And we broke it out by class again to see how first year students were viewing this, and if they were viewing this differently than other classes. They are more likely to say that AU is being responsive to student concerns, taking troubling situations on campus seriously, taking actions to address troubling situations, and keeping me in the loop about important campus issues. The social climate and the race, ethnicity, climate are not the only things covered in the survey, so I didn't want to not point out to you a few other things that are in the survey that might be of interest to you. One is that we have a series of questions. One thing we learned from RISE is that when a trouble or problem that you have on campus requires you to go to multiple offices, we were not always doing our best job to coordinate with you so that you had a positive experience. So we asked a question that says, university services work well together to address my issues and concerns. And we broke out that by class to see if we were having any impact. It's very low for most of our classes, but it is higher for our first year students. And then this breakout is for advising. And we did ask a whole series of questions on advising, which we can go into at another time, but we broke this out. In this case, this question, I received guidance that is specific to my situation when needed. And by school college, it varies a little bit, with SPA being the lowest at 68% and CAS being the highest at 79%. And then in terms of receiving guidance when needed, it's pretty close between Black and International being the highest, and then white and Hispanic are the lowest. But in general, for the advising questions, all the advising questions ended up being about 75% strongly agreeing. Financial aid, we also broke that out by class. Again, these are questions that we're trying to understand to make sure that we are giving you the kind of specific guidance that you would like. And I received guidance that is specific to my situation when needed, and offices clearly communicate what is expected of me in financial aid. And again, first year students are higher on that than some of our other students. And then residential life. I'm comfortable with my living space. You seem to be comfortable with your living space. And also you feel welcome in the residence hall, 79%. But you're less likely to say, I'm learning valuable things in residence hall programming, that living in the residence hall contributes to my overall learning experience, or that living in a residence hall contributes to learning more about myself. And I don't have the class one in here, but this is one where it's flipped. Actually, the first year students are less likely to be satisfied, and the students who are in second, third, or fourth year are more likely to be satisfied. So that is it with the results. And I kept it within 30 minutes. I know I went a little fast, but we can, I think you're getting a general sense of where we are on a lot of these questions. And so with that, I would like to turn it over to Makiba.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. You should be awake by now. So I'm pleased to be here this afternoon. As was mentioned, my name is Makiba Clay, and I've been here at AU for the last couple of months on a consultancy basis, really here to look at what is AU doing around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Where are your strengths, right? Because I think there are a lot of great things happening. Where are there also opportunities to enhance the work, do things different or better? I think that the timing is just right with the new leadership here, as well as the work around RISE. as well as in connection with the campus climate data that you just heard. So I'm just going to share with you briefly an update around some of the work that I've been doing. So I was asked to come in and do an analysis, a review of a lot of data that you all have collected. That data has come in the form of focus group notes, which you've had quite a few of those, town hall meetings, institutional data from Karen's office, data from academic affairs, student affairs, all over the institution, human resources, Office of the Provost. So reviewing all of that information, I've met with, to date, probably, I think last count, about 175 individuals in small groups. So the data, or my assessment has been informed by all of that. So personal conversations, focus groups, review of information on the institutional level, faculty, staff, students, alumni, and board members. So an entire range of folks who've been a part of this conversation. What were some of the key findings? One, I'll start off even before going to the slide, that what was striking to me is that AU's vision statement, as it has been articulated on your website and other data that I reviewed, is in fact in alignment with the work of diversity, equity, inclusion. So having been founded on social justice roots, having had at your law school to Women at the Helm, having the Methodist ideology to support the founding of the school. There's some language around meeting the needs of a changing world, so our changing demographics, social and political action, all of that, as if you were to look at it on a slide, side by side, lines up. So this is not a departure, is what I'm saying, that the diversity, equity, and inclusion work that we're embarking on, or I should say continuing, really is, falls in line. Some of the key findings that came out of the campus climate, there is a need to do some deeper work around training, learning, and development, okay? Around diversity, equity, inclusion, systems, structures of racism, et cetera. That's been a theme in everything that I've seen in conversations with folks, as well as, frankly, looking at the outcomes, like what's happening on the ground. There's a need for faculty, students, and staff to increase their knowledge and their awareness on the personal level first. You know, who am I and my respective identities? So when I show up at AU, what is that all about? So some reflection, also some knowledge, awareness, and understanding about others. This is an increasingly diverse campus. There's been some rapid transition with regard to demographic shifts, although some would say there needs to be even more. But with that comes an opportunity to dig in and learn. So now what? How do I learn more about others who are coming to AU with different perspectives, different racial identities, different sexual orientations, et cetera. And then the third piece is around the system. So the organizational system structures. How then are we a part of a system that is either perpetuating policies, procedures that are embedded in racist practices? How do we understand it when it's actually happening? And what are we going to do about it? Sorry. Another key finding was that you saw in the slides that Karen shared, there's a sense of a gap around a sense of belonging and connectedness. Who feels like they belong, who feels like they don't? It was a distinct, if you remember that slide, a gaping hole when you look at how racial minorities, in particular African-American students, responded to that question about belonging and fit. And people have asked me, well, what does that really mean? Like, do you belong or not? What it means is that some folks who are here as students have reported that, for example, if I'm walking on campus or I have my backpack, people will ask me, are you a visitor? Are you actually a student here? And questioning if you really should be here. Or there are other subtle signs and symbols that you might not belong here. Could be in the classroom, questions that are asked of you that marginalize you, make you feel like you do not belong here. People questioning your GPA or how did you get in here? Those sorts of microaggressions that occur and that in some of the data was rampant. There's also a clear need to be more consistent and transparent around policies and around building an infrastructure that is a bit more seamless. I think that there's an opportunity, higher ed, just in general, the landscape, especially in a decentralized organization like AU, tends to have this problem around either systems not talking to each other. So by systems, I mean technological systems, for instance, but also with being decentralized, you have silos and units operating, creating their own policies and procedures, and a lack of streamline. And so when that happens, it's great to have the autonomy, but when that happens, there are also greater chance of having inequity, okay? So regarding hiring, promotion, recruitment, all of that. Those were the three major areas of areas that I saw. There were two sub areas, and it doesn't mean that they're not important, but in terms of the short term, these are the ones that need to be worked on immediately. And some of them there's already been work on them. And one is around access and equity, so doing some examination around the compositional diversity across the institution. What does that look like? Do we need to make changes? Can we do better? And then the other is around curriculum and instruction. I know that you've spent the last 2 years or so working on diversifying your curriculum, which, by the way, the AUX model is really a leading practice. So, I want to say that that's great. There are some opportunities to review as you move into the next iteration of that, but that is certainly leaps and bounds to some institutions that I've worked with that actually tackle the curriculum piece. You're not totally there yet, but it's certainly advancement. So short-term actions that will be taking place in training, learning, and development, campus, climate, culture, and community, and then the infrastructure policies and procedures. Those are the areas that we're tackling. When I say short-term, I mean within the next currently as well as next year. The longer-term strategies are going to be looked at within the next 2 to 3 years. Just so that you know you're not starting off from scratch, and I'll try and make this a little bit quicker, just to give you a sense, because I think sometimes folks believe that we haven't done anything, we haven't done enough. There are lots of things happening. I just came out of a meeting with the training folks, and I know that, and even this is underreporting, there's already lots of training happening on campus. Faculty, staff, students, just in this past year, I did a quick review, over 100 offerings. And even that's low based on what I've recently seen. Students, there was a call for students who said, my peers just don't get it. They really need some training. That work has already started through orientation. I believe in the last 2 years, folks who are first-year students have gone through unconscious bias training. It's one of several offerings, but that's one that happens definitely during orientation. Moving forward, the recommendation is that we continue with our audit of all of these offerings, which is what we've spent some time today. But then thinking about which courses in the training suite would be appropriate for faculty, staff, and students to take and be evaluated on through their performance measures and create some sort of matrix. So we're actually in the process of doing that and aligning that with core competencies levels. And I'm sorry, I don't know if you were able to see some of the areas, but around unconscious bias, inclusive classroom climate, that's speaking to the data that was reported, and then building cultural competency. There were reports that students of color, in particular African-American students, do not feel safe emotionally, physically, that they needed and wanted safe spaces. Of course, there's been some review, some changes within the Office of Safety and Security, but then also getting to the point around belonging and feeling like you can connect with, meet with, whether it be socially and or through your clubs. Spaces have been dedicated for students, and I believe they've been utilizing those just this fall. So the Office of Campus Life, Vice President of Campus Life spearheaded that effort, much like the media groups, the Greek life groups and whatnot. Human Resources has also worked on bringing together staff of color, in particular African-American staff, who have also reported less satisfaction around campus climate and community. Moving forward, we want AU to be a place where all folks can thrive, where all folks feel as though they belong, that they matter. I'm wearing a bracelet that was part of a program. I am AU. We want everyone to feel that you are AU, regardless of where you sit in the institution, and regardless of what your status is. Infrastructure, policies, and procedures, just some progress. How many people are aware of the PCDI, President's Council? They have a wonderful website that they've spent a lot of time developing. If you, yes? Oh, sorry, we're wrapping up. That was my signal. So we will keep updates going on there. I think I have about 2 minutes left. I mentioned the access and equity. So there has been some progress in that area around the faculty recruitment and diversifying the faculty. And HR is also looking at policies and practices around hiring. So that's the progress piece. We will continue to do that. Curriculum, I spoke about AUX. The framework we're using for this work is called Inclusive Excellence. I will be meeting with lots of intact groups over the course of the next month. So it'll be a deeper dive into this work where you'll be able to look at the comprehensive strategic framework for change. It is looking at all of the areas that I mentioned: access and equity, curriculum, training, climate, and thinking about it in the context of linking it to leadership, linking it to resources, linking it to the overall change strategy. So with that, I will transition us into a period of conversation. I know that there are, I'm sorry, I just need to cross this. There are a number of resources here that we have in terms of faculty sitting here, some deans. We have Mary from Academic Affairs, Provost Bass, others from Student Affairs. Let us have a conversation now, both about the climate data that you had a chance to learn about and see, as well as the information that I've provided. There are microphones, at least in the center here, and let's have a dialogue here. Yes, if you could come.
I just have a quick question about how do you get access to the 27 climate data? Like, will that be disseminated to everyone?
So the question was about dissemination of information from the climate study. I believe, and I don't want to speak for you, Karen, did you want to address that? Okay, so based on what I know, that there is a plan to share the data more broadly. In what format that will take, I'm not really sure. So there will be a way that folks will have access to that before the end of this semester. Yeah. Yes. Okay, if you could just come.
Can you talk about what kind of considerations go into that plan of releasing the data, and why it's not just like into a report and put up online?
I'm sorry?
Is the microphone not on? All right, there we go.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so about the plan to release the climate data, can any of you talk about what kind of considerations go into that plan and why the data is not just put onto a report and put on the website?
Yeah, so what I know from my work in higher education that I didn't mention before, I've spent 20 years in higher ed, embedded in institutions, and now as a consultant. Typically, institutions are using that data to inform their strategies and change and all of that. I know that the next level of engagement with that data will be doing some focus groups to tease down on some of the areas. And then very few, if any, actually do reports and disseminate it in that way. This is all about context. I think Karen did a great job providing context about how this, what the data is, why it matters, and what impact it has, and how we're using it to inform the, in part, strategic planning, as well as ways to create a climate where everybody feels included. Doesn't mean that it will not be. I already mentioned that it will be. It's just a way to do that. And so I think they're thinking about, is it in a thematic way? Is it just putting up slides? I mean, I think it really has to be thought out how this happens. And this is for you all, correct? In terms of the way you're reporting out. So, yes, I thought I saw another hand somewhere. Yes.
So I think it was brought up earlier.
Would you mind standing up and projecting your voice a little bit?
So a question was brought up earlier about why Native American students and other students of minority identities weren't accounted for in the slides. And I know that Native African American brothers and sisters because of what happened in May. But yeah, I was just wondering why other students of minority identity weren't accounted for, just because even though maybe we weren't directly attacked or affected by any events that happen on campus, I know that there's people who have negative experiences with professors or just things like that.
So I believe that there were other demographics. I think the second slide broke down the demographics. So I know that Hispanic students were counted in this data, international students, African American students. The Native American question I'll give to Karen.
Now that's a good question. We can certainly add Asian. We cannot add Native American. There's just not enough responses. Originally when we did this, a lot of times when we reported these results, we were reporting underrepresented minorities and then whites and international. The interesting thing is when we started breaking it out, we started to notice that there were actually pretty big differences between Black African American students and Hispanic students. So, we were losing a lot of the richness of the data, and that's, by grouping them that way. So I think we're learning a lot through this process, and I think, we can definitely add that in there.
You said that you could add Asian students into the but I was just wondering why that wasn't accounted for.
No, not that we had added into the question. We have the data. I mean, added to the slide.
Oh, I was just going to say,
What, and can you please go to the mic? It's hard to hear up here, at least.
I'll go on card. I'll go run on cards. So if you have questions written on your card, can you pass it to the end of the row, and then I'll pick it up, and then we can have those read out.
This gentleman had a question.
Yeah. Sorry. Can someone?
Can someone from the university leadership sort of give us some ideas on what they've done so far to address the one statistic about, or the low statistic about emotional stability and feeling emotionally safe on campus? I just want to know, because there's been a few months since the data has come out, if the university has made any progress on addressing that.
Is our folks from Campus Life here? Is Fanta here? What I will say, based on what I know around student support services broadly, is that there has been some review of those services. Look, kind of an audit to look at not just the psychological services, not just campus safety, but broadly, what is happening here? What are we actually offering? Who's utilizing those services? To what extent? And what else is needed? So I do know that some of that work had started over the summer and will continue. It is one of the key recommendations that I have. Let me just add this other point. What you all saw from my report were high-level details about the road forward. You will, in the next 2 weeks or so, receive a more detailed accounting of some specific steps. We will need your feedback on that. We'll need you to say, this makes no sense, or that, yeah, this is resonating with me, this is what we think makes sense. So we'll be doing that in a number of stakeholder groups. So thank you for that question. Yes, who else?
Can you just go back to the slide about emotional stability, please? That was slide 15.
It's not emotional stability, it's I feel emotionally safe I am.
Okay.
Is there another question while
It's being looked at.
So there are some, okay. So there are some questions that I have back here. The first question was, were the differences between racial identifiers statistically significant when talking about gender? Did you include people or information from people who are non-binary?
The survey did ask whether someone was non-binary. There weren't enough responses to be able to report out on that. And I know you asked something
The
else.
first question was, were the differences between racial identifiers
Yeah,
statistically?
in most cases, yes.
The next question.
Can I just address that? Which, by the way, there was a question.
There was a question asked about, it seems like there's a heavy emphasis on the African-American experience. It's for that very point. Doesn't mean that all other demographics don't matter, or to a lesser extent. The data is telling us that there is an acute problem for students who identify as Black African-American. So that is why, but we're hoping that with some of the strategies that we're planning to put in place, that it will create an overall better climate for everyone.
The next question I have says, did the Campus Climate Survey collect qualitative data? If so, what did the analysis show?
I know this is going on in a second. Yeah, we did collect a few qualitative questions. We tried to keep those to a minimum because you will not complete the survey if we ask you too many qualitative questions. They were right in line with a lot of the results here and the kind of things that we've been talking about and that I've heard talking about. They're right in line. A lot having to do both with racial climate and with the conservative, the political climate were two things that came up pretty consistently.
The next question I have is, what is the measure for inclusiveness in curriculum, and how is progress going to be accounted for?
Someone from academic affairs
Might want to respond to that. Can you repeat the question again, please?
Yes. What is the measure for inclusiveness in curriculums, and how is progress going to be accounted for?
I will just say that whoever asked the question, I'd be curious to see what their suggestion is for a definition of inclusiveness. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to know what the school's definition was and what the school has made their own measure.
You mean each of the schools and colleges?
As in the university.
Or the university as in school?
I think some of the work of the folks who've worked on the AUX curriculum have been diving in and asking this very question. That's how the curriculum was constructed based on what I know. I do also know that one of the recommendations that I made was that in the next phase of this work is that the schools actually, whether it be through their own councils or through their dean structure, will dig deep and do an audit around what is missing from that curriculum as it relates to diversity and inclusion. There are, I think, at least 2 schools who are starting to do that work already. SIS and SOC are 2.
Yeah, so I go to SIS. I work here, so I work for the Center for Diversity and Inclusion, but I also attended SIS as a grad student. And I know that they've been doing the work here, but I wanted to know, I guess the question is pending, the answer is pending right now as to what is the measure for inclusivity, and has the university even hashed that out yet?
I believe as these groups are working, they are identifying that now. And there are some that have come from ANCU, this document around inclusive excellence that I said that this work is framed around, so they will use guidance for that. Some of these groups have started before now. So for instance, I believe SIS has started their work probably a year prior. SOC has started a year out. But that is exactly what needs to happen across all of the schools in the second phase of our work. They will be talking about measures for success. What does that look like? It will be framed from the inclusive excellence, which gives us clear guidance on that. Which, by the way, that is a document that we should post, and I think that would be fine for the larger community to have on the diversity and inclusion website, so that we all know the language, we all know the framing of this work. I think that would be an excellent piece for students as well.
We have a couple more questions. In the survey, was income used as a subcategory, and if not, why? And if yes, will those be available? Was income considered as a category, as a subcategory, so upper class, middle class, lower class, working class?
The survey results,
yes.
Whether there were some differences based on socioeconomic background?
No, whether or not in the way you have different breakdown between racial groups, was income considered?
Well, we could break it out by socioeconomic status, by what we know. So that's something that's a possibility. We haven't done that at this point. Yeah, the data is basically, it's not perfect data, because if you're a student who is very well off, you don't have to report your parental income because you don't need federal financial aid, right? So, but there is data that we do have that we can use to break it out. It's an interesting question.
I'm going to go back to your question, because I think that's an important question that you're asking, and I want to make sure I go back to that question.
I would say, for the work that needs to be done around specifically that, and you were talking about it in an academic setting in the classroom, right? I just want to make sure I understand your question.
Yeah.
So you will notice that when Karen first did her presentation and looked at the academic side, there were a couple of questions that were being asked, right? Things were like the faculty and student interaction, of the faculty-student interaction. And so to your question of what would an inclusive classroom looks like, is that when we test for that, we should not see the level of differences that we see around the racial piece. Those would be one area, for example. Another one has to do with the learning environment in the classroom itself. When we do begin to take a look at that and test for that, we should be able to find that in the classroom, that students, irrespective of their racial background, irrespective of their sort of political ideology and so forth, that they would be able to say that in that classroom, they felt that their viewpoints was heard. It may not be fully, we will disagree on different points, but they need to at least know that that viewpoint was validated and at least was heard. That would be, and so we'd be looking at a series of data points around how the classroom climate is affecting learning, and how that the differentials that we're seeing right now would not be pronounced the way they are. That would be another piece that I think we'd want to look at. Another area, so it's about really faculty-student interaction. It would be about what's the learning environment that's being created that allow people to be able to fully feel like they can step into that learning environment and not feel necessarily threatened because the position that they hope that they have is necessarily now is one that is not being validated or at least understood. Student-to-student interaction. How is the classroom managed in such a way that when you have difficult discussions and issues that come up, that there is room that's created for those different points to be heard, and that students' interaction and the quality of interaction is allowing for greater learning. Those would be some of the things that one would want to look for in an inclusive classroom. So I say that to say that there are clear indicators of what that inclusive classroom would look like, and we want to be taking a look at that. And then when you do your assessment, you would want to know what is your benchmark, what is your starting point, and then has that changed and has that been affected? I'll test for a couple of other things, and that is faculty and faculty training and faculty development. As you go through more and more faculty development, are you seeing some of that demonstrated in the classroom in a way that helps to kind of equalize things in a way that allow all students in the classroom to be able to feel like they have a place and a space in that classroom? So I wanted to just make sure that that's part of the conversation that would need to take place. And that would need to be across schools and should not be each school coming up with their own version of it, right? Because you would be taking classes in any of them. And so you need to have assurance that whether you're in SPA or SIS or COGAD and so forth, that the measures around inclusiveness are sort of the same, and that there's some standards and benchmark from which to work with.
We got another question back here. So we were kind of talking about the data, and one of the things we recognized is that I don't think that anything was too stand out or too surprising or shocking. And so I was just curious to know what, in terms of the policymakers and administrators who can actually do something with this data, what were some of the main themes and priorities that you found most important to go ahead and start working on right away? Other than maybe like the racial incidents, because I think that those are, we didn't necessarily get that from the data. I mean, I think everybody here knew that that was an issue, but kind of looking at the data, what could you say are these are the main things that we need to go ahead and work on?
I think, Maya, there are a couple of things that immediately come to mind, right? And one has to do with having to do with training and development, right? What is the learning opportunities for those who are engaging in this work? And I'm not talking about the students in this instance, but those who are either in the classroom or those who are administrators or those who have daily interactions with students across the board. So that would be one thing that one would want to take a look at. And what we do know, we just came back from a meeting just about that right now, is that we know that there are many of things that are going on around the development and training. The key thing we want to be able to look at are a couple of things. What is specifically that we're after around learning outcomes? And then how are we measuring the impact of those learning outcomes to see that they're being demonstrated? That certainly will take time, but that would be something that would be a critical piece that you would want to incorporate. Another part that we look at are run policies and procedures. Run policies and procedures, and then how do we affect those policies and procedures differently? So for example, we've heard from students that it is hard when there are bias-related incidents to know where to begin to report that, and to know then what are the channels to affect that. So then you develop procedures and policies to know, first, how do you communicate those? Two, then once you collect that, what are the points of interventions for it? The third thing is, how do you report that back to the community, and how do you look at trend data? And then based on the trends, how do you then have interventions that are more systemic? Those would be some of the things right off the bat that have come out of the survey instruments and the data that we can certainly take a look at and quickly affect.
And those are also the key points. Sorry, those are also the key points around next steps. So in this period forward for this academic year, next academic year, as Fanta said, and as was put on the slides, those three key areas we'll be looking at: training, climate, and policies. Procedures.
Hello. I know you guys are really focused on, looking at this information and moving forward with it, and kind of like building infrastructure inside the schools. But I'm wondering for students who right now are feeling emotionally unsafe, not feeling included in their classrooms, feel like they don't have somewhere to go, where can we recommend them to kind of turn to? Because I feel like there isn't a lot of concrete, access to resources, even like an anonymous forum about it, like an issue in a class or something like that. Where can students go right now, today, if they're experiencing some of these pretty significant and kind of concerning numbers about emotional stability and things of that nature?
So a couple of things. If it's classroom related, we are asking that undergraduate students reach out to their associate deans or reach out to the Dean of Academic Affairs right off the bat. If it's academically related and classroom climate, please reach out to your associate deans or reach out to the Dean of Academic Affairs. That would be the first part. If it is not within the classroom, we have the bias incident form that you should fill out. Every time it comes in, someone will be looking at it and someone will be doing follow-up on that. That would be immediately around the climate piece. Around students who are not feeling safe and the safety issues, I think the question becomes, are you in the residence hall? If you're living in the residence hall, you should be reaching out to your community directors and to residence life staff. That would be the first place that you'd want to start. And they can always connect with whether it's university, police, or someone else to be able to understand what are some of the issues that are around there. That's one of the pieces that we start with, is to say, start where you are. If it's your school, then it's your school. If it's in the residence hall, start with your residence hall. And know that they know what the channels are to then be able to kind of get to it as fast as you can. Because we don't want students to be running around from place to place, and that would be one of the things. The other things that I do want to point out as well is that the issue of emotional safety has come up quite a bit. And the issue of emotional safety, I think, needs to be looked at on multiple levels. One is in terms of emotional safety, certainly whether it's counseling, whether it's connecting with, for those who are faith-based, with the religious community, things that we certainly want to look at and that we want to spend some time on as well when it comes to emotional safety. There's a larger conversation that's going on around safety. And with safety, what I can leave you with is students have said, well, how about having the buildings locked at a certain time? How about having some of these things there? We want to engage the community in a larger conversation about what is the trade-off and what is the balance and how far do we as a community want to go? And then, are they really going to be the things that are going to make the impactful difference, right? That's the kind of conversation that we'll be having. And there'll be an exact conversation about safety on the 25th of October. And we'll be sending that out to any member of the community that's interested in engaging specifically around that issue, so we see where we can make some impactful difference.
And we have one last question. This question has a couple of parts to it. Basically, in doing research, I'm adding part to the question. But in doing research, we've seen the data, or the survey specifically, the Campus Climate Survey, is done every 2 years. It's not an annual survey. So the question is, how does this data compare to previous years? Have there been improvements on the markers surveyed in the previous years? And then when can we see this information from the previous years?
I'd be happy to answer that. As I think we said when we started out, we've been doing the Campus Climate Survey every other year. And then on the off years, we do something called the National Survey of Student Engagement. That also has a lot of information about the academic climate, the social climate, et cetera. The Campus Climate Survey, though, as Dr. Bass pointed out, there was a real change based on the work of RISE and everything that we've seen to do a total overhaul. So we had a choice. We could tweak it and then hope that we had some historical comparisons, or we could blow it up, do a completely different survey, a much better survey that we could then use going forward. And that's what we decided to do a brand new survey, completely different, really focused on the issues that you see here, with the idea being that this data that you've seen today is our baseline. I think someone mentioned that they didn't think it was much, the results was surprising. I would just say, based on my experience, I don't think many people that I was working with when we were developing the survey thought that this was going to be too surprising. We knew that we were hitting the issues that were really important to the institution, and that we had to get some baseline data on where we were so we could measure how well we're improving. So, hold us to it. We're going to be doing it again in a couple of years, and one of the things we will be doing during this academic year is a lot of these questions, like I feel included on campus. What does that really mean for students? What would it mean to get that number up? What would we have to do as administrators, faculty have to do? What would students have to do? How can student leadership help us to improve that number so that when we do this survey 2 years from now, we look like a different institution? And so we'll be digging into these data with focus groups and a lot of analysis to try and understand this. So, and of course, you've seen all the things that are happening, so that 2 years from now, we're hoping that it'll be stronger. But I guess that's the longer answer to the fact that we don't have the historical data. But we will have, and I would just encourage people in the spring to complete the National Survey of Student Engagement, because that also has a lot of questions related to climate, also related to diversity in the classroom, some really, and that's a good one to do because then we'll have some national comparisons and some national benchmarks. So it's really important you participate in that so that we can have a way of comparing ourselves to others.
I'd be remiss if I did not take this opportunity to ask again that this would be an annual survey rather than a every 2-year survey, because I think that right now, because this is the beginning years of doing this survey, that we can be able to see what progress we've been made, especially within the past academic year, especially given what's been going on college campuses in the country and here on UU's campus. I think to go every 2 years doesn't capture the full experience of a student's undergraduate experience here at American University. And there's this final question. Have there been conversations about this data, the full data, with members of the Board of Trustees? What has been their perspective? And do they find these concepts to be too liberal?
So, let me, has there been conversation with the Board of Trustees?
About the full data.
I do not know the full data, no. There hasn't been conversation with the Board of Trustees about the full data. Let's start with that.